Rocking and rolling. All right. Welcome everyone to our part 2 of registered dietitians and nonprofits. For those that didn't catch, a few weeks ago we had part 1, which is a more basic overview, talking about a few various organizations, foundations that we'll be featuring here today. If you didn't catch that, it's recorded. We'll send the link after this so everyone can enjoy that. But today's is focusing a little bit more on the business aspect of the nonprofits. So for those that don't know me, I'm Carl Barnes. I'm a registered dietitian. I'm the founder of RD2B, which is now falls under the Wholesome Village, which you'll learn more about here shortly. I'll let each of you guys introduce yourselves and we can get rocking and rolling.
So I guess I'll go next. I'm Lucille Bessler, and my foundation is Family Nutrition Center Foundation, and we're committed to improving the health of infants, toddlers, and children by empowering their parents through education. I think Livlene's next.
I am? Okay.
Yes.
I'm Livleen Gill. I am the founder and CEO of the Wholesome Village, which is dedicated to food and nutrition equity through the ages. So, and RD2B, as Carl mentioned, is under Wholesome Village, and there's a whole business reason why we did what we did. So we'll talk more about it in a little bit later. Ashley, Jasmine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Carter. I'm one of the co-founders of EatWell Exchange. We teach communities how to eat healthier with a focus on cultural foods.
Hello, I'm Jasmine, the other co-founder of EatWell Exchange. And I think Ashley said it great.
Awesome. So we have some preloaded questions for those of you who are here watching it live. Feel free to text in the chat if you have additional questions. We can definitely address those as we get through. But the first one, and these will just kind of be open discussion amongst the panel we have here. So starting at the basics, the steps to establishing the 501c3, kind of the IRS bare bones. Who wants to take that one?
I could take that. So for many years, the idea of a foundation and 501c3 had been percolating in my mind, but my hands were full. I was really running my multidisciplinary company, health entity. I didn't know if I could do it. I felt that what we were doing in our for-profit was pretty much, what the nonprofit would be. But what led to it that a lot of we were left out of a lot of grants, and we were not able to do some of the work that we wanted to just because we were not eligible for the grants. So come last year in 2022, I decided, okay, it was time to set up the foundation. All of the paperwork really seemed very challenging to me. So not having the time, I hired a company. I looked through many, what called the foundation group. They really helped me from the beginning to the end. But what I still had to do, a lot of the thinking, what is the mission? What is the vision? What are the programs we're going to offer in it? Are we going to charge for them? Are we not going to charge? All of this goes into the IRS application that each entity has to file to get the 501c3. So it's a lot of hours that you spend trying to think through, because that application can be rejected if they don't think that the mission, the vision, and what you want to do kind of meshes with a nonprofit. Those people kind of helped write what I wanted. We went over, it took about 4 or 5 months to go through that. Then we had to go through the state of Maryland, because you have to incorporate the entity in your state, because that paperwork, that piece of paper is needed in order to file with the IRS. So that's kind of what we did. And we finally made the IRS application in April of 2022. And I'll let everybody else, it took us a long time, and we finally got a 501(c)(3) actual status granted by the IRS in October of 2022. So those were the steps we had to go through for the IRS thing. I let Lucille and Ashley and Jasmine talk about what their steps were.
So I could jump in and say that my steps were very similar to Live Lean. But as I said last time, and you might all have remembered this or heard, or you could hear it on the recording, I had a pause because I filed for a foundation probably about 10 years ago. And unfortunately, at the time, kind of like what Liv Lean said, is I didn't have time to really pursue what I needed to do for the foundation. I had hired someone to help me with it, and it just wasn't flying. And I had to stick to the paying job, which a lot of people understand that. But way back then, we had a hard time getting approval. And I will say that I was very fortunate. I have an accountant in my family, and she's very tenacious. And she was on the phone for hours with the IRS at multiple times because they could not see the vision. She understood the vision from me, and then understands very much how the IRS works. So I always attribute to our finally getting that status for her talent and her knowledge. So everything else really kind of goes along the same way as anyone else once you get that 501(c)(3). But yes, it is difficult. It's not easy always to get that approval.
I think for us, it was a little different. We didn't know exactly what we were doing, but we did have a mentor, someone that had a nonprofit before, and we ended up meeting with now one of their executive directors, and just kind of getting the questions of how to get the 501(c)(3) through Florida at the time, and sat down with him, had lunch, discussed some things that we would need. And then we've, applied for the EIN number. We went to, in our case, it was SunBiz, and register. I remember vividly though, it was like at a cafe, all three founders of EatWell. We were looking through the applications and being like, what's a registered agent? Like looking up that information, making sure we're putting the right things. So it wasn't as hard for us. It was more of like, okay, what things do we need? And it wasn't until we went to SunBiz and understood that we needed an EIN, and we understood we could save the application while we wait for our EIN, and we applied for it at that time. Just a little spin too, really quickly, because Ashley's in Florida and I'm in North Carolina, I felt like it was a little bit difficult for me trying to figure out how do I, we have our everything going on in Florida, right? As far as like legally, how can we do that as like not a transfer, but an extension with North Carolina? So luckily, like within the last month, we actually just received our certificate for North Carolina, but it was really not easy. It was just a process to understand their state process compared to Florida and what everything I needed in order to be approved. So I wouldn't say it was hard. It was just a lot of like definitions, trying to figure out what's what do we need to pay for versus what do we not need to pay for? Because they will send you stuff of options of things you could pay for too. So I think for us, it wasn't as hard. It was just more of like research and advisory from others.
Ashley, you want to add something?
For the 501(c)(3), we actually did the 1023 EZ form. We did not do the 1023, like the regular one. And that one was very simple. The hardest part for that one for us was just choosing our category, because they have it by letters. It's like K2 or K17. So I feel like that was the hardest part. But besides that, it was pretty straightforward because we did the EZ, because we were still a smaller nonprofit. I'm not sure the financial amount. I think it's if it's under 200,000 or something. I don't remember what the number is, But as long as you qualify to use the 1023 EZ, it's an easier form, and we did it ourselves. We, at that time, we just went through, we answered all the questions. The only thing we were stuck on was just that category. So choosing the right one, and of course that matters because you want to be approved for the type of services you're doing. So just because you're a dietitian, you won't always put healthcare. If you're working in the community, it may be a little bit different. Or if you're working with other services, it's a little different as well. But that's the form we use. So I would recommend, if you're a newer nonprofit starting off, to try to look into the 1023 EZ and see if you qualify to use it, especially if you don't have a staff to help you.
One of the things that was harder for me to look at, if you look at how a nonprofit is versus a for-profit, having run a for-profit entity for over 20 years, in a for-profit, it's you, the founder, the CEO, has the full operating, has all the controls. When you have a 501(c), you got to disassociate. Suddenly, you may be the CEO, but the control is in the board of directors. The control is not in you. That's one of the biggest difference. And you have to have a real mind shift because things have to be run through the board. You're not the one writing the checks or doing all of that, because somebody else, the treasurer of the board, is the one technically responsible. And so the important thing when you're choosing a board right in the beginning, because that has to, they have to sign the application that is presented to the IRS, you have to be very careful who you're choosing as your board of directors. Do they agree with your mission and vision? Because they have the right to hire and fire you. So you'll get caught in the saying, you may be the founder and have all of this, but if the board president and the rest of the board don't think you are going to be it, they can fire you. So that's critical to understand to who you do in the beginning, because you have taken the onus that you founded, and it's your vision, things, why you founded the nonprofit, things that it's very personal to you, right? And you're putting all your sweat and blood equity into it. And suddenly it could be you're not the one in charge. So I just want to make sure, put it out there, that board of directors is very critical in a 501(c) formation in the beginning through all the years that it's going to operate through.
But I think also it's important to know that you can change your board of directors. So that is something that
Well, there are a whole we will go through it.
there's lots of rules to it, but yes,
there are a lot more rules to it than
yes, you can.
Than operating an LLC or a C corp. So yes,
you're not stuck forever then.
So,
Yeah.
so those are great points. I think I'm going to skip ahead here to one that ties in. Is how do you guys see, for those with the experience, and Liveline and Lucille just kind of touched on a little bit, how do you see the operation of a 501(c)(3) nonprofit being significantly different in the actual nuts and bolts of a sole prop, LLC, a S corp, what have you?
One
so
thing,
go ahead. Go ahead,
I was
Jessica.
just going to say one thing that kind of came up for me, and I think this is our accountant that brought it up. Like, we had a bank account and everything. We're getting grants, like our first grants. And he was like, okay, it's not like a for-profit where it's like, how much money can I gain, right? Or profit can I have? It's more of, or not how much money is just sitting in the bank. Because a nonprofit, you're supposed to use that money. And the IRS looks at that, like, are you impacting with this money? And these are questions too that are oftentimes asked when you apply for grants. Like, what's in your bank account? What's your operating expenses? All these different things. So for me, I think that was a big mind shift for me when our accountant told us that, to think about it like that. It's like, you don't want much of any money in your bank account, actually, because it actually yields that you are impacting the community. So that's all I was going to say. That was the first thing that stuck out to me.
Well, one of the things I think when you're filing that application, you have to give a 3-year budget. Where's the revenue coming from? What are the line items? What are you going to charge for? and what are going to be your operating expenses, what is going to be your personnel, what is going to, all of that. Even if you have zero money, you have nothing coming in, but they want to see from that 3-year projection where you intend to get the money and where you intend to spend that. And it's very hard to wrap your head around to make that, because you're thinking, I don't know, am I going to get $5? Am I going to get 500? Like, how, what if I don't get it? And then when it was explained, it doesn't matter. This is just, they want to see, what they really want to see, where exactly what Jasmine said, how you're getting the money and how you envision spending it, because that's what really they want to see. Whether are you just paying, salaries, not really doing the work. And it's so that 3-year projected budget that you said, that is important to provide. The second piece, I'll say, once you get that 501(c), you have your board meeting and you have your bylaws of that have to be gotten through. So as Lucille was saying, you can get rid of your board if you don't like it. Well, it's going to have to be according to the bylaws that was written, and what's the term of those people, how your board is going to come on and off, and all of that. And those bylaws are, having had a lot of experience with the bylaws, and I will credit the different organizations that I was part of in understanding how those bylaws are. I really tried to do the bylaws envisioning, looking forward, what if, because everything in an organization really gets tied down into those bylaws. So those bylaws are your operating rules. So you have to be careful how the board gives the CEO a contract, what gets written in that, what's the salary going, and if it's a new nonprofit you don't have, would there be something that they are going to make it up later? So all of those things kind of are in the beginning part of it. Now you put your money into it, starting the foundation and the operations in the beginning. Are you going to be able to recoup the money? That's what, yes, you can do that. But it is something that then the board has to authorize, saying the founder can get their money back and you have to provide the receipts and everything. So the way it's done, it's a little bit backwards, but it can be done. So those are some of the things that I think are crucial when you're looking at starting the operations.
For me, 2 things stuck out when it comes to the difference between nonprofit and for-profit. So number 1 is transparency. If you start a nonprofit, everything you do is transparent as far as all your reportings, your salary, who you get money, who you're giving money to, who you're taking money from, all of that is transparent. Your tax form, anyone can pull it up right now. And you can type in a nonprofit's name, 990, you'll see exactly how much money they have and who's getting that money. So it's completely transparent compared to a for-profit. What you do in your time is what you do, no one else knows. Another thing which I feel really interferes with the functioning of a nonprofit is people forget that it is a business at the end of the day. So what I mean by that is you start a nonprofit because there's a cause you care about. You see an issue, you want to fix that issue, but you still have to generate money. Because we all know there's very few things we can do in this world without money, without funding, without some type of support. So even though you have a nonprofit, it does not mean you're just handing out food all day. It doesn't mean that you're only doing free services. You have to generate revenue. And a lot of times people forget that and they do everything for free, but you have to find a way, whether it's donations, grants, and I know we'll talk about some of those things later, but you have to think in your mind, you have to find a business plan and say, how is my nonprofit going to still flourish? How are we going to thrive? How are we going to bring money in and monitor the money coming out? So it's always important that even though you're a nonprofit, you still have to have a business model to direct how money is going to flow, because you still need money, even though the word nonprofit is there. Like, don't think it means you're not profiting. You have to still have some type of profit, some type of income that's coming in to be able to function.
Very true.
That was very well said.
Thank you.
And similar to how Jasmine had mentioned having a accountant friend, kind of the paraphrase version I got from another accountant friend, was the same thing. It's you're looking at it as a business, and the difference between the for-profit and nonprofit is the for-profit, your money's going to the shareholders, whether it's you as a sole prop or multiple parties, and a nonprofit's going to your programs. So everything else, obviously not exactly the same, but more or less is operating by the same tenets. So on that perfect note, the types of funding. So obviously there's several ways, there's more common ways to fund nonprofits, but I'll just kind of open it up to kind of talk of the types of prospective funding or current funding that everyone's dealing with right now.
I don't mind starting this one off. My first suggestion is do not start a nonprofit because you know there's a grant out there that can fund you, because you may not get that grant. I can speak for us. We did not receive our first grant until about 4 years into EatWell Exchange. So even though there's a ton of grants out there, number one, we did not have a grant writer because we could not afford one. And number two, we just didn't get approved because we didn't have enough metrics or anything like that at the time. So just because you see a cool grant out there that says they'll pay for senior services, it does not mean that you should start a nonprofit for senior services because you think you'll get that grant, because you may not. And so with that being said, you have to start looking for funding in other ways. And I recommend to vary funding. So what I mean by that is try to look for donations, personal donations, whether it's friends, families, coworkers, whoever, and then also corporations that can donate, individuals that are not directly connected to you that can donate too. And then also when it does come to applying for grants, I recommend to start local. So I live in Miami, so I recommend to start with grants in your area. And the reason why I do this is because typically you can meet a person. If I apply for a Children's Trust Fund grant, I can physically go to the Children's Trust Fund. I can introduce myself. I can meet someone. And what I recommend to do, if possible, before that grant even comes out, partner with them. Find an event they're doing and say, hey, can I table at your event? Meet someone, go to a dinner or breakfast they're having. Make yourself a person to them, because it's going to be someone within that organization that can potentially vouch for you. Also with local grants, which will be what I focus on, I recommend to schedule meetings. A lot of times they have office hours where you can schedule meetings with someone. And of course, that's legal to do. It's different than emailing someone because you found their name somewhere. If they offer having a meeting, take that opportunity. And the biggest thing is with local grants, it's less competition. And also they're typically smaller amounts, but if you're a starting off nonprofit, that's probably what you need, because you don't want to bite off more than you can chew when it comes to grants, because that may end up hurting you in the long run to take out more money that you know how to budget. And one more point on this, budget. Make sure you're managing your budget. Even if your nonprofit only has $400 in your bank account, it does not matter. Take that money that you have, budget it appropriately, put where percentages are going to different places. So that way, as you scale and get more money, you'll know how to function. You always want to run your nonprofit bigger than what you are today. So that way scaling will not be an issue.
I agree. And two, one thing that I've learned here from like transitioning from Florida to North Carolina is I have to start over, in a sense where everything's Ashley's talking about, I literally am doing that now. I'm partnering with different organizations. I get so many emails, and I can be transparent on here, from just going to different conferences, meeting people that have the same vision as me, as EatWell Exchange. Even like finding out we got some followers on Instagram that are in North Carolina that may recognize us. It's finding, like, get on their email list, you know, of organizations, because they will tell you about different grants too when it is time for you to apply for grants. And when I say time for you to apply for grants, like, I've been in North Carolina for 2 years, and this year will be my first time applying for a very small grant. But it's still in partnership with other organizations that have more like reputation in the area that I'm in, and they're well respected. And then the other thing I would say too is try to get on a grant reviewer board, meaning like volunteer your time to be a person to review grants, because then you can kind of see like what different organizations, what companies are looking for. And then that'll put you like a step ahead of when it is time for you to apply for grants, right? A couple of years later, of what they're looking for, you know, what's going to put you ahead of those who may not been on the back end. So that's what I would say do.
So I'm going to take a different, what Jasmine and Ashley have said, true to an extent, where when you are a nonprofit, an entity, and you don't have much metrics to show or work, what the actual nonprofit has done. However, as individuals involved in the nonprofit, you can leverage what you have done in other areas. So you may have run a program, you may have managed a budget, may have run, you were on part of a grantee. You can leverage that experience and say, that is what the person, the founder, the executive director, comes with X number of experience. The challenge with the nonprofit becomes a lot of grants and donations. People want to fund a specific program. They want to know specifically where it's going, but not necessarily for the operations of the nonprofit, right? What I mean by operations is your rent money, your electricity money, your money for your computers, your money for, people to pay for admin, those operations, day-to-day operations, a lot of them don't want to fund. And that's usually very few grants are out there that will fund for the operations. And a lot of those come from local and state. They're usually not federal grants. They're not big grants. They're smaller grants. We have had experience, as Ashley said, writing local, go from local to state and federal, and then partnering with other organizations to get your name out, that you could do the work, which works kind of better than applying for something first time around on your own when no one knows you, especially if it's and taking the opportunity to meet people. Even if it's not necessarily about the grant, but it's an area that you are interested. And I'll give you our example. One of the areas we are very interested in Wholesome Village is the equity and nutrition security where it's concerned, where food allergies are concerned. So we've been meeting people who are working in that field, different nonprofits, the advocacy groups and all. And we've got a lot more connections and got to know people, and now are partnering with them. And rather than thinking we could have done it on our own, it's not something we were asking them for a grant. It's just as Ashley said, just meeting them, and then you get to know them and they tell you about other things that are available, or meet this one. So that's really been helpful for us. But it takes a lot of work. I can tell you that. Literally every day on my calendar, I have at least a minimum of one new person I am meeting for something or the other. And sometimes you think, really, do I really want to? Because you are time crunch for other things that you have to do. But that's just the way to keep it rolling, to meet. You never know who it's going to end up helping with the nonprofit, or your vision of what you want to do. In terms of, we are all over here, Lucille, Ashley, Jasmine, Carl, and I, partnership that Ashley talked about. We are trying to, all of us, partner with our different foundations to work on some things that we all passionate about, and kind of works together. And we're going to see how that works out. We all have different strengths in areas, and they're complementary strengths that we hope we can build off on those and be successful in what we want to do together. So we believe that partnering with other organizations is really helpful in the long run in achieving your mission and vision.
So I'd just like to add, when I had first started, I had a similar experience as Jasmine and Ashley. I didn't have very much to show when I was applying for donations or when I was applying for grants. But as Livleen said, I used very much what we were doing in our practice and how practice had been established for many years. And you know, I think that at the time, I didn't realize how important it is, but I was following outcomes in our practice. So when patients would come to see us, we would take the time to plot how many visits, what kind of outcomes we were seeing. And we saw a lot of families with children with problems, special needs. So that really helped us a lot. So even if you're thinking down the road what you want to do, think about what you could do now to really kind of set that up. And then we really looked for donations in places I wouldn't have thought, but there's so many groups that have foundations, like Whole Foods donated some money for our children's nutrition education program. And then we reached out to some of the industry people we know, some of the, the nutritional supplement companies, and they donated some money. But just to add, because I think that, Livleen, Jasmine, Ashley, and Carl, there's such rich information that they're providing. I wrote some notes myself. They taught me a couple of things too. But I think that you realize you have to be really well educated in how you're going to form this foundation, what you're going to do, what are you going to do in the interim till you start really making some money? Because I think, as Ashley said, we have to eat, we have to make money. So I find now that we're doing a lot with a local children's hospital and some of the community programs. And there is no funding for what we're doing. And it takes a lot of time, but it is serving our mission. It's very exciting. We are really pretty excited about it. So my feeling is now to actually join up with other groups that are really looking at early intervention for infants and toddlers and trying to collaborate with these groups. But I think that it really does take a lot of time and energy, which is great. That's why we're here. And a lot of networking, really going and, maybe knocking on those doors of people that you haven't thought of in a while, that that they're in areas that you want to work in.
That's all really great. Skipping on to this one, Livleen, if you might want to take point on this one, payment processors. So we're talking about all these different ways to solicit, request funding, apply for grants and whatnot, but whether it's just collecting individual donations from individuals or whatnot, you tend to need a little bit more than a bank unless you're just shaking hands and collecting checks. So you want to talk a little bit about your process through soliciting or selecting and setting up a payment processor? Are you still muted?
When we set up the website and people were asking, so where can I pay? It's like, oh, wait. We wanted to streamline the process of them being integrated on the website, them being able to pay what processor we needed, and in terms of connected to the bank, but also then it would give them kind of a receipt. So I was looking in through I use Stripe in my other side of the business, and I was going down a rabbit hole. And then I texted Jasmine and said, Jasmine, I don't want to waste any more time. What research did you do to find this? Jasmine, you want to take it from there because I stole your idea.
And I probably took it from Ashley because,
And-
but no, seriously, I think it was, I don't know if it was both of us. For us, it was more of experience. I know we used PayPal at one point. To us, a lot of fees were getting taken out, honestly. And it was not really adding up to us. It was a little bit more difficult. And again, that was our experience. But then we went to DonorBox. And so even if you go to our website now, like to give or donate, you have DonorBox where they can give a one time or they can give monthly, where it's taken out of whatever they're paying with monthly. And then of course they can cancel or whatever, they want to do. So I think that's the easiest process for us. It's actually a very popular, and I'm sure we don't mind putting it in the chat as well. But from what I remember, that's where we started, PayPal, and then DonorBox has been very good with limited fees as a nonprofit organization.
Right,
And it is free for for up till a certain amount, and we haven't hit that threshold. So for us, it's still free. That is coming in. Anyone that needs to write a big check, we don't put that through DonorBox, just getting the payment. We ask them to write a check because you still have a significant amount of money taken out depending on the amount it is. So we still take those as checks, but the smaller amounts they do. And the other thing with DonorBox is it also prompts people that there's a processing fee. Would you like to add the processing fee? And since we've been doing this, there's only one individual that has not added that processing fee. The rest of the people who pay add that processing fee. So we kind of get almost the amount that they are actually donating to us.
And also something neat, and DonorBox isn't sponsoring us. If they want to, they can, but that's just what we're all using. And I always recommend to just do your research because new platforms always come out. And we found out about DonorBox from one of my friends, actually. That's what he was using from his nonprofit. So and that's another tool. Of course, we'll talk about that too when it comes to partnership, sharing resources. It's no need to do all this research for something if someone else has figured it out. So always share things with your community that you work with. But a good thing about DonorBox is that you can break down what their donations will do. And so what I mean by that is we can say $50 will help us provide meals for one child. $100 will help us do a cooking demonstration. And that way, when someone's giving, they're more empowered to give because they know my donation is going to this. And also it helps them find an amount. If they want to stock a community fridge we work with, they'll see they need to donate $300. And that way they're able to give based off of what they want. And another great thing is it sends them a receipt. So automatically you don't have to worry about the tracking because it does that for you. It sends over a receipt to them. It tells them how much they're giving and why they're giving. So it'll say that you're giving $100 to contribute to a culinary class. And that way they see what they're giving. And also you are reminded, and you can break it down and itemize who's giving money to all these different programs. So you can ensure that people are donating and that you're using their money like you said that they would. So that's what I like about DonorBox.
It sounds like the common trend, no matter what platform, is it's kind of considering two things. It's on the back end and front end. So it's the ease of use for the donor, and then really to Ashley's point, there's being able to also above and beyond communicate kind of the value prop as well, of being able to communicate where the dollars go. And I think that was a great point too, of maybe even inspiring a different gift based on what you're tying it to. But then you also need to take care of your back end with the functionality, the reporting side. But maybe there are nonprofits out there that are still operating solely off of checks. And if that's how you operate, that's how you operate. But we're in a digital world now, so having the diversity of options is definitely needed there.
And also, Carl, when you said ease of use, that made me think, because one time on our website, our link was broken to our donations and no one told us. We didn't know until probably, I don't know how long it was broken. So that's one thing to remember, that when you do have these platforms, go in there at least once a month, set a date on your calendar every 15th or whatever date, and go in there and check these things out. Make sure it's functional. because people will not tell you. They'll just not give, depending on the person. They may say, oh, well, I'll just text Ashley later and let her know, and they'll forget. People are busy. People are easily sidetracked or easily distracted. So it's up to you to ensure that it's easy for people to give to you, because if not, that may limit the amount of gifts that you get.
Very true. Very
Great
true.
point.
We actually found that out, didn't we, Carl?
Yes.
Happens to the best of us.
We found that.
I've also never had a broken link on the RD2B website ever. It's always working. So I think next we can maybe just dig a little bit more into the theme that we keep bringing up, is that power of partnership, and then cut the recording and then open it for questions for anyone here live, if that sounds good.
Yeah, let's start with the power of partnership, Carl. So as when we first started this segment, Carl said that RD2B, he founded RD2B, but RD2B is now under the Wholesome Village. And the reason why we did it that way is, and Carl, you can jump in at any time. Carl had, for RD2B, a really good vision of what he was trying to do with the students and the interns to get them exposure to different areas and the mentorship. Now with the Wholesome Village, there were areas that we were going to be focusing on, like nutrition education and counseling, allergy food, free food pantry, medically tailored meals. And we just started talking. It's like, well, that would be a great way for your students and interns to work with any one of these missions or other nonprofits or other areas that they could get the experience. And even though Carl had been running the RD2B, it was not a nonprofit. And he was thinking about, and all what we just talked about, the paperwork and all what he would have to do. So we floated the idea, well, why don't we bring this in, and the students will be able to run through all of these areas that they can help partner with and get the exposure to. And that's kind of how RD2B came under Wholesome Village and is, and not just with the Wholesome Village, but other nonprofits and other areas of practice that they can get exposure to. It's a win-win for everyone. They get the exposure, we get students and interns to learn and help and, see different areas that they may be interested in, and get our message, followed more by others and across. So that's kind of how we did our RD2B with the Wholesome Village.
I can expand a little bit on that. And it's why I was a little quiet on the first question too, is it's a good example of how intimidating it can be. I've got enough for-profit ventures happening. So I've been operating for the last 3 years, RD2B, essentially as a nonprofit mission without the 501c3, without the IRS designation. So it's a great reminder of all of the business structure that we've been talking about, that you cannot sustain a feel-good mission indefinitely. You might be able to, but it's not easy to sustain a feel-good mission indefinitely without the right structure. So I knew it was inevitable, but I dragged my feet for a couple of years doing it. It was not sustainable to continue throwing money out of pocket without any revenue stream coming in, or without somehow otherwise structuring it in a different way. So the partnership makes a lot of sense. It also expands the opportunities and services as we grow, and allows us to kind of leverage. It's that two-way street, leverage each other's strengths and build off of that.
Yeah, I would say change it, for some people, shift your mindset of like it's a competition. I've noticed like on both spectrums, like if we try to partner with someone who looks at us more as like competition, or who looks at us as more as like a partnership. And I'm bringing that up because partnerships are relationships. That's what they are. I cannot tell you how many times EatWell has gotten money, gotten opportunities because of relationship with people. And even to this day, just relationships. For example, we had a grant awarded to us through a big, well-known company that we did what we needed for the grant. And to this day, they still give us opportunities. Like, would you like to be on this panel? This is a paid opportunity. Would you like to do this speaking engagement? Oh, I just forwarded this email to so-and-so. They're with this foundation. Let's connect with them. Like, we literally just had a call like that on Friday, Ashley, where someone knew someone in a huge organization. It's like, yeah, absolutely. Send them our information and our ideas. So when I think of partnership, I just encourage people to think of relationship. How can they be a benefit to you, but also how can you be a benefit to them? Not just all take from an organization, but volunteer, get in the communities and do different things with them. Send them grant opportunities that you know you can't complete because you're not ready to, or you're not at that stage that that organization is at. So I think for partnerships, that's what I've learned so much. And even like in North Carolina here, I noticed that I went to 3 conferences in like 2 weeks. I don't recommend anybody doing that because I was exhausted after. But one thing I noticed in those conferences, I'm talking about each conference, the same people were there. And what that told me is that you know who the key players are. Those are the people that you want to start to form relationships with and get them to see your value also. So that was a big lesson for me. Like last month, I was like, oh my gosh, I saw you at the last conference. I'm like, yeah, I saw you too. All right, I think I need to know you, right? Like all these different relationships are partnerships and vice versa. So definitely take advantage of it and, you know, volunteer and do as much as you can for their organization as well, and spread the word for the bigger mission, which is really helping people.
I would say when it comes to the power partnership, the main thing to do, I would say, start off by surveying your community. So think about the community you serve and ask yourself who is serving them or who should be serving them. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have a meal delivery service. You have to think about all the things that are in play, whether it's transportation, whether it's housing, whether it's food costs, all those different areas. And you don't have to tackle them all, but find out what organizations do. And from there, start developing partnerships. So start working with them, call them, find out what events they're having and show up at their events. Not being creepy, but just really like, you don't have to stalk people, but just really when you find out they're doing something, support. Sign up for an email list, show up, find out what they're doing. Because like Jasmine said, it's a relationship. So no one wants a relationship where someone's always taking from you. You have to give as well. Sorry. And also when it comes to applying for funding, I went to a couple of different grant workshops, and that was a big recommendation. Have partners when you apply for grants, because that shows that, number one, that you have other relations in the community, and also shows sustainability. Because if you have 4 different people coming together to work on one grant, you're more likely to keep this program going than if you're by yourself. At least that's, you know, the way they see it sometimes. Also consider your staffing. So when it comes to a nonprofit, you may want to scale and grow and do a bunch of different things. But if I know that I don't have the capacity, it's important to get partners that do. So sometimes finding larger organizations that can have, you know, more bandwidth to do different things, whether it's sponsorships they have, whether it's grants, transportation, whatever they may have that you can benefit from, partner with them and see if they can take off the load from things that you do not have access to. And another tip, because when it comes to partnership, you have to create those things. So what I recommend doing is network with intention. Sorry. Is network with intentions. So if you go to a networking event, if you go to any type of organizational event and there's a lot of people there, I do not recommend to talk to everyone in the room. I recommend to find 3 people, choose 3, and find those people, talk to them, have a conversation, let them know who you are, what you do. So of course, practicing your elevator pitch, find out what they do and actually listen, because sometimes we talk to people and we're not really listening. So make sure you find out what they do. And my 3rd tip is to find an idea that you can work on in that moment. A perfect example of that is if I meet a college advisor while I'm at a networking event, and I will tell him, hey, you work for a college? EatWell. We do presentations for colleges where we talk about wellness. I could even come out and do a Wellness Wednesday if you like. And then that's when he's like, oh, okay, now I see how to work with her. Because as dietitians, a lot of times people do not know what we do. So it's up to us to show them opportunities we can create between each other. So I don't recommend to try to do coffee with everyone, but instead find an event, find an activity, find an action plan that you can work on and set a meeting towards that.
So I think that everyone here participating understands that these wonderful extroverted personalities are really necessary. So, I think that sometimes people can be shy in their personal life, but you have to have a certain personality for your business life. So I just love what you're sharing, Ashley and Jasmine. I kind of think in my business life, I walk in a room, I put a big smile on, I say hi, and I do exactly what Ashley says. Look for those people. Do your homework ahead of time. See who, if you could, who's going to be at these meetings. I know many meetings where I actually looked at the attendance list beforehand to try to figure out, okay, who's who and where can I find some common ground. But I think that what comes through is you have to be friendly and open and just have that really great attitude. And that's how you're going to make those great relationships. I truly believe it is all about relationships.
By the
And
way,
not to
Lucille,
mention,
I'm an introvert, so.
Oh my.
No,
You
you didn't hear
could've-
what she said.
I heard what she said. She said she's an introvert. So then she
Yes.
puts that business. That's
I
the
do.
extrovert is the business, because people will say to you all the time, I'm sure, you're different personally than you are in your business,
Yes.
aren't you?
Which
Yes,
is
I
why I
like that
said,
comment.
do not go to 3 conferences in 2 weeks.
oh, and
See,
also something
okay.
I forgot to mention, of course, is social media.
Oh,
Social media is huge. And Jasmine and I, we cannot count. I would say, if I'm just throwing it out there, I would say 80% of our opportunities, brand sponsorships, partnerships, a lot of things have come from our Instagram. So do not sleep on that. So even if you're the person where you haven't worked up the nerve to talk to somebody in the room, maybe you can do it on social media. Develop your page. You don't have to be on there 24/7. Develop your page or find someone who can, and just really make sure your voice is resonating in what you're doing and posting your events. Because unfortunately, in the world we live in, if you're not posting about it, it's not happening. So I do recommend to leverage that as another part of your toolbox. So of course, still go to events, talk to people, still email people, but add social media to it, because that's a great way to get people to see who you are and also to have something to refer back to. And at any conference I go to, I always say, follow us on Instagram. So that way you can't forget about me. In 2 months, you'll see some posts and it may motivate you to give. It may motivate you to partner. It may motivate you to refer us to someone else. So definitely utilize that tool as well.
That's all amazing. I want to say thank you to everyone for being here. I will make sure in this recording we tag websites and social handles where it's published. I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording, and then